Hi, welcome to Lección 1 Grammar. These pages right here, 29 to 38, they correspond to the grammar textbook pages that is the PDF file in the lesson content folder. Because the emphasis is on the grammar, I suggest that you use the ebook, which is a different link in the lesson content so that you can hear the vocabulary and see it in context, for example, used in dialogues. But again, when you're looking at these PowerPoints, just know that this is a detailed explanation of the grammar. So let's get started with our first. What are we going to learn in this lesson? Our lesson objectives are the following. In Spanish, we're going to learn how to conjugate regular AR verbs in the present indicative. So everything we do is really the present tense. So don't worry about that word indicative. It's really just the present tense. Identify interrogative and negative sentences. So we'll be able to ask questions and respond to them using affirmative and negative responses. Describe forms and positions of adjectives. Adjectives is something we'll learn over time, but it's good to just get our discussion going on how we change them to match nouns and also where they can be positions in reference to nouns. We'll tell time. Remember numbers that we started from our preliminary lesson, and we're going to need the verb said for that. Also, we're going to go over numbers 300 to 1000. We're not going over all the numbers at once. We're just taking it slow. In future lessons, you'll go beyond 1000. And some of the communicative goals have to do with requesting and repeating preliminary patient information. So let's get started with our first objective, which is present tense regular AR verbs. And just because this is the first time we learn a full set of verbs, I'm going to go over this section with you. The infinitive of all Spanish verbs consists of a stem, which, for example, in the verb hablar, the stem would be habl. Everything before the ending, which in this case is an AR ending verb. So it's important to explain that there's three types of verb endings in Spanish. There are AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. Good news, there's no other type that you'll learn in the future. These are the three types of endings. And when we first learn verbs, they come to us in infinitive forms. So for example, you'll see the verb hablar, and it means to speak. So then if we want to make sentences, we're going to have to conjugate these verbs. Okay? When we say conjugate, what we're doing is doing something similar to what you're seeing. Well, not something similar. We're doing exactly what you see in this chart. We start with the subject. For example, yo, tú, usted. We start with the subject and we have new endings. So we remove the AR. Please note that you can't add a new ending until you remove the old ending, which was the AR. So this is the pattern for all AR ending verbs, just like hablar, which is our first example. Our new verb becomes yo hablo. Tú hablas. Usted, él, and ella are always going to share a conjugation. Usted habla, él habla, ella habla. Important to note that verbs do not mark gender, so the verb for él and ella are exactly the same. And you can see these sentences here, just showing you everything together, but really emphasizing that the new ending is the O, AS, or A, right? So far, we're looking at the singular, talking about one subject. When we go over to the right side, we're seeing plural subjects, right? So this is going to be plural. But again, we're going to have different endings. For nosotros, if you remember, nosotros means we. Nosotros hablamos. The new ending is amos, but put it together with what the stem was. Hablamos. Vosotros, we kind of mentioned how it's not used a lot, but it does exist, so we should just kind of go over the form. Ice, like ice cubes in your drink, but it's habláis, habláis. And just like usted, él, ella shared, well, guess what? Ustedes, ellos, and ellas are going to share a conjugation always also. So ultimately, you're learning 6. And again, we'll have on the right side, ustedes hablan, ellos hablan, y ellas hablan. So what you should memorize is really the 6 conjugations. Hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, habláis, and hablan. So it'd be a good time to just kind of pause the video, go over that a few times, write it down, and just really make sure that you understand how we came up with these new forms of the verb, which we call conjugations. Let's do a little quick practice. So a little knowledge check for us is to say, okay, if you have to fill in the blank using the verbs below, which form of the verb matches? Okay, yo, would it be hablas, hablo, or hablan? So pick your response. And then for dos, Jacinto, he is a subject like él. So would it be estudia, estudiamos, or estudio? So if you need more time, pause. If not, I'm going to show you the answers in the next slide. Well, if you said yo hablo, correct. And Jacinto estudia, correct. Because those are the conjugations that match the subjects. You're going to have lots of practice with this as you work through this week and the practice activities, which we reference as Mind Tap. But again, this is just really understanding how verb conjugations work. Okay, these are some common AR verbs. These came mostly from Leccion 1 and verbs you'll kind of see throughout the chapter. So we have entrar, hablar, and try to repeat them after me. Pagar, pesar, vomitar, which another way to say vomitar would be regresar. Llenar, sometimes the double L can be like llenar or llenar. Necesitar y regresar. It's good for you to just go and reflect back on what they mean if you're not sure based on the photos. So again, these being common AR verbs means they follow the conjugation patterns we just went over. For example, what would be the yo form of entrar? Entro. What about the nosotros form of pagar? Pagamos. What about the tú form of pesar? Pesas. So again, common AR verbs, we're going to use them throughout the course, but don't forget to always, in the midst of any grammar explanations, continue to study your vocab. Okay, so how can we ask and answer questions? Well, here's kind of the interesting thing that makes it a little easier in Spanish. You don't have to add extra words to ask a question, honestly. You can take a statement like ustedes necesitan la tarea and put question marks around it. Say it like, I always tell students, say it like you're confused. Ustedes necesitan la tarea. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say tarea. La tarjeta? Ustedes necesitan la tarjeta? And it kind of doesn't even really matter where you put the ustedes. You can say it like number 2. ¿Necesitan ustedes la tarjeta? And number 3. ¿Necesitan la tarjeta ustedes? They're all correct. Technically, number 3 is the preferred version, although a lot of people use number 1. So it's kind of starting with the subject, but a lot of questions will end with the subject. Sorry. So to answer that, sí, nosotros necesitamos la tarjeta. Do you need the card? Yes, we need the card. So we don't have to add any extra words. We just put the question marks and inflect our speech, meaning rise it at the end. ¿Ustedes necesitan la tarjeta? If we're going to make a negative sentence, so before I talked about answering questions, let me just show you how to make a negative sentence. An affirmative sentence just has typically your subject, verb, and any other complements, like ella habla inglés. But to make a negative sentence, you're going to want to place no in front of the verb. Ella no habla inglés. Okay, so again, put no in front of your verb to negate that. Okay, before we go there, I want to go back to this slide for just a bit. So let's say I'm answering this question negatively. Ustedes necesitan la tarjeta. Well, first, if it's negative, we'd say no. And then put a comma there. No, because we're answering the question. But then we say we don't need it. So it would sound like this. No necesitamos la tarjeta. Again, why are there 2 no's? The first no answers the question. No. But the second one says we don't need. No necesitamos. So whether you use nosotros or not, there's going to be 2 no's. No necesitamos la tarjeta. If you want to keep nosotros in there, you would say no. Nosotros no necesitamos la tarjeta. Again, keep no right in front of your verb. It would go right in there. And again, if this is negative, replace sí with no. Let's talk a little bit about adjectives. Again, being that this is just trying to cover all the main topics of the chapter. So, form and position of adjectives. Well, adjectives are words that modify or describe a noun. So, they're going to have in Spanish 4 different endings because nouns can be masculine, feminine, they can be singular or plural. So again, we have 4 forms because we're marking whether an adjective is masculine, feminine, singular, or plural. And that's what we have right down here. For example, a masculine adjective is negro. It ends with an O. Well, if an adjective ends with an O, you can change it to be feminine. It becomes negra. If you want to make it plural but keep it masculine, then make it negros, right? The O is the masculine part, the S is the plural. And then you're going to end up adding A instead of O to make it feminine like we did over here, but plural, negras. So this is when an adjective ends with an O. Negro, negra, negros, y negras. If an adjective ends with any other ending, you're not going to have a feminine, but you can have a plural. So you have inteligente is masculine and feminine, but you can have inteligentes to be plural, whether it's masculine or feminine. For feliz, if an adjective ends with a Z, there's a little exception to the rule. You're doing more than just adding an ES, you're changing the Z to a C. So you go from feliz to felices. And lastly, what do we do if an adjective ends with a consonant? Sorry. You're going to add ES. Azul becomes azules. Okay. So here are some examples. El mantel rojo, la casa grande, los muchachos guapos, y el hombre soltero. Colors are adjectives, guys. So let's pretend we're talking about a chair, which would be la silla. Then it wouldn't be rojo, it would be roja. But if an adjective ends with an E, you're only going to have like inteligente, singular and plural. Again, just a few examples to see it in action. Let's do a quick check to see how you're doing with this. So select the adjective that completes each sentence correctly. El mesero es mexicana, mexicano, or mexicanos. For number 2, es una chica felices, francesas, or inteligente. If you need more time, pause here because I'm going to show you the answer in the next slide. If you said be mexicano, muy bien. El mesero es mexicano. Keep it masculine with the O. Es una chica inteligente. A was plural and B was plural, so it cannot match. Okay, we're making sure the adjective matches the noun, mesero. And if you're not sure what that meant, at least you can kind of tell by looking at the O ending that it's masculine, but that means the waiter. And then chica is girl, so it's feminine with the A, so chica inteligente, keep it singular. Now we're moving on to one of our other objectives, which is telling time. Now, to be good at telling time, you need to have the verb ser and you need to have your numbers at least until 30, and you'll see why. So here are some key tips. When you're telling time, if it's singular like 1 o'clock, you're going to use es. Es la una. Now, time is feminine. The feminine article is because it's la hora. So maybe that can help you remember. Es la una. Okay, so it's always going to be feminine like that. If you want to add minutes, use y cuarto, for example. Now, only 1 o'clock will be es. All the other times after that is going to be son as our verb. Well, because it's plural, right? So if it's 2, 3, 4 o'clock, son las dos, son las tres, son las cuatro. In this case, son las 5 y 10. Just a few more examples. Es la 1:20. Again, let's do son when it's more than 1. Son las 4:30. Instead of 30, we prefer the word media. So make sure you use media instead of 30. Sounds way better. Okay. So here we have the hour is given first and then the minutes. Like we've seen, adding on minutes with y, which means and, honestly. More examples, son las 4:10. Literally means it's 4 and 10. Son las 12:05. Again, use son. Remember, it's feminine, so instead of la, because it was singular for 1 o'clock, we say las. Son las. Son las. Son las. If you want to